Hey everybody, we're here in the garden today working on tomato plants and pepper plants. I'm trying a new system out this year where I want to trellis my tomato plants. And so I've got these two cattle panels that I have arching over both of my tomato beds. And what I've done is I've planted my tomato plants close enough to the cattle panel that I can attach them as they grow, and if all goes well, they'll trellis up and over, and I won't end up with these massive tomato bushes that are hard to manage like I have for the last 3 years. So this is a new process for me. Today I need to go through and tie up these tomato plants because they're getting a little bit tall and they're not supported, so they're starting to fall over. And I don't want to risk them breaking whenever we get a lot of wind or rain. So let's go ahead and get them tied up. To do this, I've got some baling twine, and I'm going to loosely tie these tomato plants off to keep them growing backwards towards this trellis. The baling twine is soft enough, and I'm going to keep it tied fairly loose to these plants so as not to risk damaging the plants themselves. Cut off the extra. Alright, so that will start growing back towards the trellis. Let's go ahead and finish off these others. These two down here are still small enough that I'm not going to worry about tying them off to the trellis yet. The other ones you can see I've got tied up. These ones are actually about half the size. If I turn around to this bed, you'll see these plants are significantly larger, and so they definitely need tied up. What I'm trying to do here is push some of the branches out through the trellis to encourage them to grow outwards, and then ultimately I'll help them to move up. I also want to get some sunlight to these lower branches. And so this looks pretty good. It's a good looking tomato plant. This plant has really taken off. It's got shoots going everywhere. And so I'm going to help it to navigate through this trellis. You can see I'm pushing it through these open squares to encourage some upward growth. Alright, you can see here on this back side, I've just got a square knot tied around here. And that's a loose string. I don't keep that very tight because I don't want to cause any damage to the tomato plant itself. what I'm going to do is just wrap these around, encourage some growth upwards and outwards. And if all goes well, this will be a nice giant tomato trellis here in a couple of months. We're well on our way. Alright, so that's all done. Those are officially tied off to the trellis on both sides. The other thing I like to do while I'm in the garden every time is pull a few weeds. If I do a little bit at a time, it saves me from having to do a bunch of weeding all at once. So I've got some carrots here growing beside my tomato plants. These need some space, and so you can see some things pop up. That is actually what appears to be a pepper plant, and that's being eaten. So I'm actually going to leave that there. I know it's going to crowd out a couple of my carrots, but if something's eating that, it means it's not eating something else that I want, and I'm okay with that. But there are some other things in here that I don't want, so I'm going to go through and pick a few of those out. The other thing that, if you read instructions on your planting your seeds, or if you talk to certain gardeners, there's kind of two schools of thought. The first is being, you need to kind of follow the instructions on the packets and go in and plant your seeds, and then once they are grown, space them. I don't have time for that, and I found that if I just, space my seeds correctly the first time around, I may end up with a few bunches of, carrots, for example, but I'm still usually going to get enough yield that I'm not going to worry too much about a carrot that may not have grown to 100% of its anticipated size. I'm okay with some 75% carrots, especially if I end up with more of them. So here's an example. I've got, 3 or 4 carrots coming out within a 50-cent size space. Those are going to yield carrots still, albeit they may not be 8 or 9 inch long carrots. You're still going to end up with a bunch of carrots, and you're going to be able to eat them, and they're going to taste the same. And so I let them go. I don't do any spacing of my carrots or my beets. I've got a beet bed that I'll show you here in a second, and it's the same story. We got some lettuce going there. My lettuce did not turn out well this year. I think I got a rabbit in here that was getting himself dinner every night. So I've only got a couple of bunches of lettuce going. That's okay. I do have some room to plant some things here in front of the tomato plants, and I am most likely going to do that here very soon. Here's my last tomato plant, and you'll see I'm not trellising this one. This one is just the good old-fashioned tomato cage. And when you're using cages, one thing you need to be mindful of is keeping up with the growth of your plant. And so as it grows, you want to continue to tuck your branches inside so that they don't grow so big that they're unsupported and break off. I also like to keep my tomatoes off the ground because that's where the bugs live, and they like to get after the tomatoes once they're nice and red and juicy. Got a couple of stems here that aren't faring too well, so I'm just going to snap them off so they're not using up resources that the rest of the tomato plant needs. That one's looking pretty good. I think that's a cherry tomato plant. And then over here are my peppers. They're in cages as well. Same story, just continue to tuck them inside the cage so that all the branches are supported you don't end up with any snaps and loss of harvest. Probably looks like I'm being a little bit rough on these. They're pretty durable. As long as you don't bend the branches hard, you're usually going to be okay. They'll bounce back. These plants are pretty vigorous. All right, I am happy with how those are looking. Show you the rest of the garden so far. We got some tomato plant there. We've got some beets going, some yellow squash plants. I'm doing garlic for the first time this year. It came up nicely, but now I'm getting a little bit of brown on it, so I got to keep a close eye on that. Got strawberry beds, 2 onion beds, and 2 potato beds, and the potatoes are looking really good again this year. I actually need to get those mounded here before long. All right, so we're going to wrap this video. Hopefully you got some value out of seeing how I'm trying to trellis my tomato plants this year. Got those strung up, got my peppers fixed and in the cages. They're growing nicely. Couple more months, we ought to be eating good. On to the next project.